Hello and welcome to Storytelling Live. I'm so happy you are here tonight. It's kind of cool. This, well, it's in the Victorian days, the stories of travel and adventure and travel adventure or just travel were really popular and selling everywhere. People traveling for uh, for pleasure and for leisure too. So this tonight's story and the series of stories is all about traveling to amazing places and running into incredibly affluent people, and we don't really know, like, on the backs of whom did they earn all this money. Mm. They just have it. It's just there, But, it might have been like investing in something, right? But if you're going to talk about, well, this man's an African millionaire. And I wanted him when I first learned about this series. I wanted it to be an actual, well, an African. But he's an African, but from South Africa, a white South African. So, but if you already know about the African millionaire, you know that he's he's this, gentleman scoundrel, like a gentleman thief. And he's great. He's a great character. He's a great character. Otherwise, I wouldn't be reading him tonight. I just want some people who aren't familiar with an African millionaire to be familiar a little bit. And in those lines of communication, along those lines, I will, here is, okay, I've got for us set up a little thing that I wrote, and then the Wikipedia entry, and then we'll go right into the episode of the Mexican Seer. But I looked through the story, and I looked, and he's only mentioned as an actual Mexican man maybe twice, but his affectations are referred to as Spanish. So I decided to make the differentiation between Latino American and a Hispanic European. So we're going to call him the Spanish Seer for the purposes of our story tonight. And, purists beware. So, but that's the only thing I've actually changed. Because, Mexican people are like Mexican people. They are not like Spaniards, with just the Spaniards. We know what the Spaniards did, right? Yep. So we're just going to keep everything sort of neat and tidy like that. I hope you'll be patient enough to listen to this story because it's wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. An African Millionaire. Stories of Colonel Clay, gentleman thief, and man of many disguises, as told by the brother-in-law and secretary to a lawyer and later financier named Charles Vandrift. So Vandrift is a Holmes kind of character, and the narrator, Seymour Wentworth, is Watsonny, right? So you have Vandrift and Wentworth, and these are tales of posh people living large lives, spending lots of money, and traveling to relieve themselves of IMHO, the apathy of affluenza. Marvelous stories, nonetheless, but we just have to keep everything in check, right? So we know what we're looking at. Wikipedia. Charles Grant Blair Findy, Allen, born in February 24, 1848, died in October 25, 1899. He was a Canadian science writer and novelist, educated in England. He was a public promoter of evolution in the second half of the 19th century. After leaving his professorship in 1876, he returned to England, where he turned his talents to writing, gaining a reputation for his essays on science and for literary works. A 2007 book by Oliver Sacks cites with approval. One of Allen's early articles, Note Deafness, a description of what became known as amusia, published in 1878 in the learned journal Mind. Allen's first books dealt with scientific subjects, includes physiological aesthetics, 1877, flowers and their pedigrees. 1886, he was influenced by the associationist psychology, as expounded by Alexander Bain and by Herbert Spencer, and later often considered, but we don't know by whom, the most important individual in the transition from associationist psychology to Darwinian functionalism. Okay, in Allen's many articles on flowers and on perception in insects, Darwinian arguments replaced the old Spencerian terms, leading to a radically new vision of plant life that influenced H.G. Wells and helped transform later botanical research. On a personal level, a long friendship that started when Allen met Spencer on his return from Jamaica grew uneasy over the years. Allen wrote a critical and revealing biographical article on Spencer that was published after Spencer's death. After assisting Sir W.W. Hunter with his Gazetteer of India in the early 1880s, Allen turned his attention to fiction. Between 1884 and 1899, he produced about 30 novels. In 1895, his scandalous book, entitled The Woman Who Did, promulgating certain startling views on marriage and kindred questions, became a bestseller. The book told the story of an independent woman who had a child out of wedlock. Oh, good grief. Owing to his concern with these subjects, Allen was associated with Thomas Hardy, whose novel Jude the Obscure, 1895, was published the same year as The Woman Who Did. Very interesting character. The author, Grant Allen, tonight's author. In his career, Allen wrote 2 novels under female pseudonyms. Marvelous. One of these, the short novel The Typewriter Girl, he wrote under the name Olive Pratt Rayner. Another work, Evolution of the Idea of God, 1897, propounds a theory of religion on heterodox lines comparable to Herbert Spencer's ghost theory. Allen's theory became well known, and brief references to it appear in a review by Marcel Mauss, Durkheim's nephew, in the articles of William James and in the works of Sigmund Freud. The young G.K. Chesterton wrote on what he considered the flawed premise of the idea, arguing that the idea of God preceded human mythologies, rather than developing from them. Chesterton said of Allen's book on the evolution of the idea of God, it would be much more interesting if God wrote a book on the evolution of the idea of Grant Allen. Well, that'll never happen, and it never did. So, Allen also became a pioneer in science fiction with the novel British Barbarians, 1895. This book, published about the same time as H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, which appeared in May 1895, which includes a mention of Grant Allen. Also described time travel, so this book, The British Barbarians, also described time travel, and it was mentioned in Wells's The Time Machine. Although the plot is quite different than The Time Machine, Allen's short story, The Thames Valley Catastrophe, published in December 1897 in the Strand magazine, we know the Strand from Holmes, and other cool things too, but they don't come to mind. Only Holmes comes to mind. But that's me. Describes the destruction of London by a sudden and massive volcanic eruption. So that's the Thames Valley catastrophe. Describes the destruction of London by a sudden and massive volcanic eruption. Interesting. I've looked over this story before. I haven't read it verbatim. This is pretty much another cold read for you. In the early days of this series, I used to read out loud and film myself reading them so that I could understand what my intonation meant. And then I kind of cast all that to the wind. And we are pretty legitimately winding the series down, my friends. So I have thrown caution to the wind. I worked out in the yard today. My yard is on the other side of this window in my office here, downstairs. And I worked in my yard. Well, they finished. Well, there was a big storm in my town in January 25th, and it blew our fence down. And that fence had been rotting, and the trees that the neighbors had planted started pulling it up, and it was quite loose. So big wind came by, blew it over, and they finally found a contractor who came in and put it all in, and looks nice and fresh and clean, and it's wonderful. And they left the job undone, and they came back today to finish the job, and they're still like they sawed bricks and stuff to put the bricks back nestled around the fence posts. And man, that caused a lot of dust, and that dust piled up, and that dust doesn't sweep up too easily. It just kind of blows up in the wind and then settles back down, about 10 feet down the way. And they've got a long, narrow little yard space. Today I was out there working and weeding and pinched my fingers a bunch, pinching weeds, and probably ruined my back. I'll be feeling that tomorrow. So, but it's springtime, right? So we're all out in the garden planting and making it beautiful. So I'm hoping that you guys are doing something similar. And so I'm beat, and but there's plenty of daylight, and and then the water heater busted, so I had fence guys and water heater guys in the garage, and it's been a big day, and I managed to get everything done, pretty much everything done. And my friend wanted to go pick something up in another town tomorrow, and I had to say no. That's everything that's happening in my life. Almost everything. I'm not telling you everything. You can DM me about whatever filthy details you want. I invite you to. I'd love to hear from you. DM me, baby. And, we might even have a finale. We might have one more of these and then a finale of some kind. Maybe. I don't know. Very busy. And it's probably going to be a thing where I come back, and do things, again. And I'll tell you about it. I'll make a big deal about it, maybe. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It's been great. COVID's been great. You have made COVID great. For me, because you provided this platform for me, and I'm very thankful. Thank you. I hoist my sweet beverage to your honor. So, we know everything we need to know about this. How long have I been going on now? What do we got? 15 minutes, man. You guys can hang with me for 15 minutes. Okay. So, an African Millionaire has short stories, but they're all kind of linked. So it's cool. You'll have a good time reading the book. There are, how shall we say, the Gutenberg versions, if you want to. You make use of that by downloading it as a text file and putting it on your Kindle. And you can read those text files. So, archive.org, if you've got a Kindle, you can rock archive.org. Rock it. I mean, there are some amazing books you've got to check out. Amazing collections. And all that before was just sitting gathering dust in the libraries, in the deep storage, because they weren't really circulated. They were delicate. They were hidden away and forgotten about, and then they got to the auxiliary stacks, and then to the regional, storage stacks, and I don't know. There are some amazing collections that have been scanned and uploaded to archive.org. And also some old video games if you're into, you want to play, I think they have Street Fighter and stuff, Defender and stuff, Asteroids, the stuff you remember. You could play all that. So, and then there are, So, I love dusty old books, even if they're just text files, but I prefer the mildewy smell and prefer to have a few dusty books in my collection. I'm sure you do too. Okay. Thank you. I just need to unwind a little bit. The episode of the Mexican Seer, hereby known as the Spanish Seer. My name is, and I might adopt the British accent in this too, because it's written with a total British accent. You'll see. It's cute. It's really cute. Okay. Episode of the Spanish Seer. My name is Seymour Wentworth. I'm brother-in-law and secretary to Sir Charles Vandrift, the South African millionaire and famous financier. Many years ago, when Charlie Vandrift was a small lawyer in Cape Town, I had the qualified good fortune to marry his sister. Much later, when the Vandrift estate and the farm near Kimberley developed by degrees into Clodetorp Golcondas Limited, my brother-in-law offered me the not unremunerative post of secretary, in which capacity I have ever since been his constant and attached companion. He is not a man whom any common sharper can take in. This is Charles Vandrift, middle height, square build, firm mouth, keen eyes, the very picture of a sharp and successful business genius. I've only known one rogue to impose upon Sir Charles, and that one rogue, as a commissary of police at Nice remarked, would doubtless have imposed upon a syndicate of the dock, Robert Houdin, and Cagliostro. We had run across to the Riviera for a few weeks in the season, our object being strictly rest and recreation from the arduous duties of financial combination. We did not think it necessary to take our wives out with us. Indeed, Lady Vandrift is absolutely wedded to the joys of London, and does not appreciate the rural delights of the Mediterranean littoral. But Sir Charles and I, though immersed in affairs when at home, both thoroughly enjoy the complete change from the city to the charming vegetation and pellucid air on the terrace of the Monte Carlo. We are so fond of scenery, That delicious view over the rocks of Monaco, with the maritime Alps in the rear and the blue sea in front, not to mention the imposing casino in the foreground, appeals to me as one of the most beautiful prospects in all Europe. Sir Charles has a sentimental attachment for the place. He finds it restores and refreshes him after the turmoil of London, to win a few hundreds at roulette in the course of an afternoon, among the palms and cactuses and pure breezes of Monte Carlo. The country, say I, for a jaded intellect. However, we never on any account actually stop at the Principality itself. Sir Charles thinks Monte Carlo is not a sound address for a financier's letters. He prefers a comfortable hotel on the Promenade des Anglais at Nice, where he recovers health and renovates his nervous system by taking daily excursions along the coast to the casino. This particular season, we were snugly ensconced at the Hotel des Anglais. We had capital quarters on the first floor, salon, study, and bedrooms, and found on the spot a most agreeable cosmopolitan society. All Nice just then was ringing with talk about a curious impostor, known to his followers as the great Spanish Seer, and supposed to be gifted with second sight, as well as with endless other supernatural powers. Now, it is a peculiarity of my able brother-in-law's that when he meets with a quack, he burns to expose him. He is so keen a man of business himself that it gives him, so to speak, a disinterested pleasure to unmask and detect imposture in others. Many ladies at the hotel, some of whom had met and conversed with the Spanish Seer, were constantly telling us strange stories of his doings. He had disclosed to one the present whereabouts of a runaway husband. He had pointed out to another the numbers that would win at the roulette that next evening. He had shown a third the image on a screen of the man she had for years adored without his knowledge. Of course, Sir Charles didn't believe a word of it, but his curiosity was roused. He wished to see and to judge for himself of the wonderful thought reader. What would be his terms, do you think, for private séance? He asked of Madame Picardet, the wood lady to whom the Seer had successfully predicted the winning numbers. He does not work for money, Madame Picardet answered, but for the good of humanity. I'm sure he would gladly come and exhibit for nothing his miraculous faculties. Nonsense, Sir Charles answered. The man must live. I'd pay him 5 guineas, though, to see him alone. What hotel is he stopping at? The Cosmopolitan, I think, the lady answered. Oh, no, I remember now. The Westminster. Sir Charles turned to me quietly. Look here, Seymour, he whispered. Go round to this fellow's place immediately after dinner and offer him £5 to give a private séance at once in my rooms without mentioning who I am to him, and keep the name quiet. Bring him back with you too, and just come straight upstairs with him, so that there may be no collusion. We'll just see how much the fellow can tell us. I went as I was directed. Found the Seer very remarkable and an interesting person. He stood about Sir Charles's own height, but was slimmer and straighter, with an aquiline nose, strangely piercing eyes, very large black pupils, and a finely chiseled, close-shaven face like the bust of Antonius in a hall in Mayfair. What gave him his most characteristic touch, however, was his odd head of hair, curly and wavy like Paderewski's, yes, standing out in a halo round his high white forehead and his delicate profile. I could see at a glance why he succeeded so well in impressing women. He had the look of a poet, a singer, a prophet. I have come around, I said, to ask whether you will consent to give séance at once in a friend's rooms, and my principal wishes me to add that he is prepared to pay £5 as the price of the entertainment. Senor Antonio Herrera, that was what he called himself, bowed to me with impressive Spanish politeness. His dusky olive cheeks were wrinkled with a smile of gentle contempt as he answered gravely, I do not sell my gifts. I bestow them freely. If your friend, your anonymous friend, decides to behold cosmic wonders that are wrought through my hands, I am glad to show them to him. Fortunately, as often happens when it is necessary to convince and confound a skeptic, for that your friend is a skeptic, I feel instinctively. I chance to have no engagements at all this evening. He ran his hand through his fine long hair reflectively. Yes, I go, he continued, as if addressing some unknown presence that hovered about the ceiling. I go! Come with me! Then he put on his broad sombrero, with its crimson ribbon, wrapped a cloak round his shoulders, lighted a cigarette, and strode forth by my side towards the Hotel des Anglais. He talked a little, by the way, and in that little in curt sentences, he seemed buried deep in thought. Indeed, when we reached the door and I turned in, he walked a step or two farther on, as if not noticing to what place I had brought him. And then he drew himself up short and gazed around him for a moment. Ah, the Anglais, he said. And I may mention in passing that his English, in spite of a slight southern accent, was idiomatic and excellent. It isn't here, then. It is here. He was addressing once more the unseen presence. I smiled to think that these childish devices were intended to deceive Sir Charles Vandrift. Not quite the sort of man as the City of London knows, to be taken in by hokers pokers, and all this I saw was the cheapest and most commonplace conjurer's patter. We went upstairs to our rooms. Charles had gathered together a few friends to watch the performance. The seer entered, wrapped in thought. He was in evening dress, but a red sash round his waist gave a touch of picturesqueness and a dash of colour. He paused for a moment in the middle of the salon, without letting his eyes rest on anybody or anything. And then he walked straight up to Charles, held out his dark hand. Good evening, he said. You are the host. My soul's sight tells me so. Good shot, Sir Charles answered. These fellows have to be quick-witted, you know. Miss Mackenzie. Oh, they'd never get on at it. The seer gazed about him, and smiled blankly at a person or two whose faces he seemed to recognize from a previous existence. Then Charles began to ask him a few simple questions, not about himself, but about me, just to test him. He answered most of them with a surprising correctness. His name begins with an S. I think you call him Seymour. He paused long between each clause, as if the facts were revealed to him slowly. Seymour Wilbraham, Earl of Strafford. No, not the Earl of Strafford. Seymour Wilbraham Wentworth. There seems to be some connection in somebody's mind now present between the Wentworth and the Stafford. I am not English. I do not know what it means. But there are somehow the same name, Wentworth and Strafford. He gazed around, apparently for confirmation. The lady came to his rescue. But Wentworth was the surname of the great Earl of Strafford, she murmured gently. And I was wondering as you spoke whether Mr. Wentworth might possibly be descended from him. He is, the seer replied instantly, with a flash of those dark eyes. And I thought this curious, for though my father always maintained the reality of the relationship, there was one link wanting to complete the pedigree. He could not make sure that the Honourable Thomas Wilbraham Wentworth was the father of Jonathan Wentworth, the Bristol horse dealer, from whom we are descended. Where was I born? Sir Charles interrupted, coming suddenly to his own case. The seer clapped his own 2 hands to his forehead and held it between them as if to prevent it from bursting. "Africa," he said slowly as the facts narrowed down, so to speak. "South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, Janssenville, DeWitt Street, 1840. By Jove, he's correct," Sir Charles muttered. "He seems to really do it. Still, he may have found me out. He may have known where he was coming. By Jove, he's correct." "I never gave him a hint," I answered. "Till he reached the door, he didn't even know to what hotel I was piloting him." The seer stroked his chin softly. His eye appeared to me to have a furtive gleam in it. "Would you like me to tell you the number of a bank note enclosed in an envelope?" he asked casually. "Go out of the room," Sir Charles said, "while I pass it round to the company." Señor Herrera disappeared. Sir Charles passed it round cautiously, holding it all the time in his own hand, but letting his guests see the number. Then he placed it in an envelope and gummed it down firmly. The seer returned. His keen eyes swept the company with a comprehensive glance. He shook his shaggy mane. Then he took the envelope in his hands and gazed at it fixedly. "A. F. 7 3 5 4 9. He answered in a slow tone. "Bank of England. Note for £50, exchanged at the casino for gold won yesterday at Monte Carlo." "I see how he did that," Sir Charles said triumphantly. "He must have changed it there himself, and then I changed it back again. In point of fact, I remember seeing a fellow with long hair loafing about. Still, it's capital conjuring." "He can see through matter," one of the ladies interposed. It was Madame Picardet. "He can see through a box." She drew a little gold vinaigrette, such as our grandmothers used, from her dress pocket. "What's in this?" she inquired, holding it up to him. Señor Herrera gazed through it. "3 gold coins," he replied, knitting his brows with the effort of seeing into the box. "1, an American $5, 1, a French 10-franc piece, 1, 20 marks, German, of the old Emperor William." She opened the box and passed it round. Sir Charles smiled a quiet smile. "Confederacy," he muttered, talked half to himself. "Confederacy." So the seer turned to him with a sullen air. "You want a better sign," he said, in a very impressive voice. "A sign that will convince you. Very well. You have a letter in your left waistcoat pocket, it may seem to those who know Sir Charles. Incredible. You have a letter in your left waistcoat pocket, a crumpled up letter. Do you wish me to read it out? I will, if you desire it." It may seem to those who know Sir Charles incredible, but I am bound to admit, my brother-in-law colored. What that letter contained, I cannot say, but he only answered very testily and evasively, "No, thank you, I won't trouble you. The exhibition you've already given us of your skill in this kind more than amply suffices," and his fingers strayed nervously to his waistcoat pocket as if he was half afraid. Even then, Señor Herrera could read it. I fancied, too, he glanced somewhat anxiously toward Madame Picardet. The seer bowed courteously. "Your will, Señor, is law," he said. "I make it a principle, though I can see through all things, invariably, to respect the secrecies and sanctities. If it were not so, I might dissolve society. For which of us is there who could bear the whole truth being told about him? He gazed around the room. An unpleasant thrill supervened. Most of us felt his uncanny Spanish-American knew really too much. And some of us were engaged in financial operations. For example, the seer continued blandly, I happened a few weeks ago to travel down here from Paris by train with a very intelligent man, a company promoter. He had in his bag some documents, some confidential documents. He glanced at Sir Charles. You know the kind of thing, my dear sir, reports from experts, from mining engineers. You may have seen such marked strictly privé. They form an they form an element in high finance, Sir Charles admitted coldly, precisely. The seer murmured, his accent for a moment less Spanish than before, and as they were marked strictly private, I respect, of course, the seal of confidence. And that's all I wish to say. I hold it a duty, being entrusted with such powers, not to use them in a manner which may annoy or incommode my fellow creatures. Your feeling does you honor, Sir Charles answered with some acerbity. Then he whispered in my ear, confounded, clever scoundrel, say, Seymour, rather wish we hadn't brought him in here. Senor Herrera seemed intuitively to divine this wish, for he interposed in a lighter and gayer tone. I will now show you a different and more interesting embodiment of occult power, for which we shall need a somewhat subdued arrangement of surrounding lights. Would you mind, Senor Host? For I have purposely abstained from reading your name on the brain of anyone present. Would you mind my turning down this lamp? Just a little, so. That will do. Now, this one, and this one, exactly. That's right. He poured a few grains of powder out of a packet into a saucer. Next, a match, if you please. Take it. It burned with strange green light. He drew from his pocket a card and produced a little ink bottle. Have you a pen? Have you a pen? He asked. I instantly brought one. He handed it to Sir Charles. Oblige me, he said, by writing your name there. And he indicated a place in the center of the card, which had an embossed edge with a small middle square of different color. Sir Charles had a natural disinclination to signing his name without knowing why. Why, and what do you want with it? He asked. A millionaire's signature has so many uses. I want you to put the card in an envelope, the seer replied, and then to burn it. After that I shall show you your own name written in letters of blood on my arm, in your own handwriting. Sir Charles took the pen. Yet the signature was to be burned as soon as it was finished. He didn't mind giving it. He wrote his name in his usual firm, clear style, the writing of a man who knows his worth, and is not afraid of drawing a check for 5,000. Look at it long, the seer said from the other side of the room. He had not watched him write it. Sir Charles stared at it fixedly. The seer was really beginning to produce an impression. Now, put it in that envelope, the seer exclaimed. Sir Charles, like a lamb, placed it as directed. The seer strode forward. Give me the envelope, he said. He took it in his hand, walked over toward the fireplace, and solemnly burnt it. You see, it crumbles into ashes, he cried. Then he came back to the middle of the room, close to the green light, rolled up his sleeve, and held his arm before Sir Charles. Then there, in blood-red letters, my brother-in-law read the name Charles Vandrift in his own handwriting. I see how that's done, Charles murmured, drawing back. It's a clever delusion, but still I see through it. It's like that ghost book. Your ink was deep green, your light was green. You made me look at it long, and then I saw the same thing written on the skin of your arm in complementary colors. You think so, the seer replied, with a curious curl of the lip. I'm sure of it, Sir Charles answered. Quick as lightning, the seer again rolled up his sleeve. That's your name, he cried, in a very clear voice, but not your whole name. What do you say, then? To my right. This one also. Is this one also a complementary color? He held his other arm out. There in sea green letters, I read the name, Charles O'Sullivan Vandrift. It is my brother-in-law's full baptismal designation, but he has dropped the O'Sullivan for many years past. And to say the truth, he doesn't like it. He's a little bit ashamed of his mother's family. Charles glanced at it hurriedly. Quite right, he said, quite right, but his voice was hollow. I could guess he didn't care to continue the séance. He could see through the man, of course, but it was clear the fellow knew too much about us to be entirely pleasant. Turn up the lights, I said, and a servant turned them. Should I say, coffee and Benedictine? I whispered to Vandrift. By all means, he answered. Anything to keep this fellow from further impertinences, and, I say, don't you think you'd better suggest at the same time that the men should smoke? Even these ladies are not above a cigarette, some of them. There was a sigh of relief. The lights burned brightly. The seer for a moment retired from business, so to speak. He accepted a pot tiger with a very good grace, sipped his coffee in a corner, and chatted to the lady who had suggested Stratford with marked politeness. He was a Polish gentleman. Next morning, in the hall of the hotel, he saw Madame Picardet again, in a neat tailor-made travelling dress, evidently bound for the railway station. What? Off? Madame Picardet cried. She smiled and held out her prettily gloved hand. Yes, I'm off, she answered archly. Florence or Rome or somewhere. I've drained Nice dry like a sucked orange. Got all the fun I can out of it. Now I'm away again to my beloved Italy. But it struck me as odd that if Italy was a game, she went by the omnibus, which sticks down to the train deluxe for Paris. However, a man of the world accepts what a lady tells him, no matter how improbable, and I confess, for 10 days or so, I thought no more about her, or the seer either. At the end of that time, our fortnightly passbook came in for the bank in London. It is part of my duty as the millionaire's secretary to make up this book once a fortnight, and to compare the cancelled cheques with Sir Charles' counterfoils. On this particular occasion, I happened to observe what I can only describe as a very grave discrepancy. In fact, a discrepancy of £5,000. On the wrong side, too. Sir Charles was debited with £5,000 more than the total amount that was shown on the counterfoil. I examined the book with care. The source of the error was obvious. It lay in a cheque to self or bearer for £5,000 signed by Sir Charles, and evidently paid across the counter in London, as it bore on its face no stamp or indication of any other office. I called in my brother-in-law from the salon to the study. Look here, Charles, I said. This is a cheque in the book which you haven't even entered. And I handed it to him without comment, for I thought I might have been drawn to settle some little loss on the turf or at cards, or to make up some other affair that he didn't decide to mention to me. Well, these things will happen. He looked at it and stared hard. Then he pursed up his mouth and gave a long, low whoa. At last he turned it over and remarked, "I say, Seymour, my boy, we've just been jolly well brown, haven't we?" I glanced at the check. "How do you mean?" I inquired. "What? The Seer," he replied, still staring at it ruefully. "I don't mind the 5,000, but to think the fellow should have gammoned the pair of us like that, ignominious. I call it—" "How do you know it's the Seer?" I asked. "Look at the green ink," he answered. "Besides, I recollect the very shape of that last flourish. I flourished it a bit like that in excitement of the moment, which I don't always do with my regular signature." "He's done us," I answered, recognizing it. "But how the dickens did he manage to transfer it to the check? This looks like your own handwriting, Charles, not a clever forgery." "It is," he said. "I admit it. I can't deny it. Only fancy his bamboozling me when I was most on my guard. I wasn't to be taken in by any of his silly occult tricks and catchwords, but it's never occurred to me that he was going to victimize me financially in this way. I expected attempts at a loan or extortion, but to collar my signature to a blank check, atrocious. How did he manage it?" I asked. "I have the faintest conception. I only know that those are the words I wrote. I could swear to them anywhere." "Did he can protest the check?" "Unfortunately, no. It's my own true signature." "We went that afternoon without delay to see the chief commissary of police at the office. He was a gentlemanly Frenchman, much less formal, red tapey than usual, and he spoke excellent English, with an American accent, having acted, in fact, as a detective in New York for about 10 years in his early manhood. "I guess," he said slowly, "after hearing your story, you've been victimized right here by Colonel Clay, gentlemen." "Who is Colonel Clay?" Sir Charles asked. "That's just what I want to know," the commissary answered. In his curious American French English, "He is a colonel, because he occasionally gives himself commission. He is called Colonel Clay because he appears to possess an India rubber face, and he could mold it like clay in the hands of the potter. Real name, unknown. Nationality, equally French and English. Address, usually Europe. Profession, former maker of wax figures at the Musée Grévin. Age, what he chooses. Employs his knowledge to mold his own nose and cheeks with wax additions to the character he desires to impersonate. Aquiline this time, you say? Huh? Anything like these pictographs?" "The photographs?" He rummaged in his desk and handed us two. "Not the least," Sir Charles answered, "except perhaps as to the neck. Everything is quite unlike him. That's the colonel," the commissary answered, with decision, rubbing his hands in glee. "Look here." He took out a pencil and rapidly sketched the outline of one of the two faces, that of a bland-looking young man with no expression worth mentioning. "There's the colonel, in his simple disguise. Very good. Now watch me. Figure to yourself that he adds here a tiny patch of wax to his nose, an aquiline bridge. Just so. You have him, right here. And the chin up, one touch. Now, for hair, a wig, for complexion. Nothing easier. That's the profile of your rascal, isn't it?" "Exactly," we both murmured. By two curves of the pencil and a shock of false hair, the face was transmuted. "He had very large eyes with very big pupils, though," I objected, looking close. "And the man in the photograph here has them small and boiled fishy." "That's so," the commissary answered. "A drop of belladonna expands and produces the Seer. 5 grains of opium contract and give a dead alive, stupidly innocent appearance. Well, you leave this affair to me, gentlemen. I'll see the fun out. I don't say I'll catch him for you. Nobody ever yet has caught Colonel Clay, but I'll explain how he did the trick. That ought to be consolation enough for a man of your means, with a trifle. About 5,000. You're not the conventional French office holder, Monsieur le Commissaire. I ventured to interpose. You bet, the commissary replied, and drew himself up like a captain of infantry. Monsieur, he continued in French with the utmost dignity, I shall devote the resources of this office to tracing out the crime, and if possible, to effectuating the arrest of the coupable. We telegraphed to London, of course, and we wrote to the bank with a full description of the suspected person, but I need hardly add that nothing came of it. 3 days later, the commissary called at our hotel. Well, gentlemen, he said, I am glad to say I have discovered everything. What? Arrested Seer? Sir Charles cried. The commissary drew back, almost horrified at the suggestion. Arrested? Colonel Clay, he exclaimed. Mais, monsieur, we are only human. Arrested him? No, not quite, but tracked out how he did it. There is already much to unravel, Colonel Clay. Gentlemen. Well, what do you make of it? Sir Charles asked, crestfallen. The commissary sat down and gloated over his discovery. It was a clear, a well-planned crime amused him vastly. In the first place, monsieur, he said, disabuse your mind of the idea that when monsieur, your secretary, went out to fetch Senor Herrera, that night Senor Herrera didn't know to whose rooms he was coming. Quite otherwise, in point of fact, I do not doubt myself that Senor Herrera, or Colonel Clay, call him what you like, came to Nice this winter for no other purpose than just to rob you. But I sent for him, the brother-in-law interposed. Yes, he meant for you to send for him. He forced the card, so to speak. If he couldn't do that, I guess he would be a pretty poor conjurer, huh? He had a lady of his own, his wife, let us say, or his sister, stopping here at his hotel, a certain Madame Picardet. Through her, he induced several ladies of your circle to attend his seance, and as she and they spoke to you about him and aroused your curiosity, you bet your bottom dollar that when he came to this room, he came ready, primed, and prepared with endless facts about both of you. What fools we've been, say? My brother-in-law exclaimed. I see it all now. That designing woman sent round before dinner to say I wanted to meet him. And by the time you got there, she was ready for bamboozling me. That's so, the commissary answered. He had your name already painted in both his arms, and he had made other preparations of still greater importance. You mean the check? Well, how'd he get it? The commissary opened the door. Come in, he said, and a young man entered, whom we recognized at once as the chief clerk in the foreign department of the Crédit Marseillais, the principal bank of all along the Riviera. State what you know of this check, the commissary said, showing it to him, for we had handed it over to the police as a piece of evidence. About 40 weeks since, the clerk began. Say 10 days before your séance, the commissary interposed. A gentleman with very long hair and an aquiline nose, dark, strange, and handsome. He called in at my department and said I could tell if I could tell him of the name of Sir Charles Vandrift's London banker. He said he had a sum to pay on your credit, and asked if we could forward it to him. I told him it was irregular for us to receive the money, as you had no account with us, but that your London bankers were Darby, Drummond, and Rothenberg Limited. Quite right, Sir Charles murmured. 2 days later, a lady, Madame Picardet, who was a customer of ours, brought in a good cheque for £300, signed by a first-rate name, and asked us to pay for it in her behalf to Darby, Drummond, and Rothenbergs, and to open a London account with them for her. We did so, and received in reply a cheque-book. From which this cheque was taken, as I learned by the number by telegram from London, the commissary put in. Oh, that's the commissary. From which this cheque was taken, as I learned from the number by telegram from London, The commissary put in. Also, on the same day on which your check was cashed, Madame Picardet in London withdrew her balance. But how did the fellow get me to sign the check? Sir Charles cried. But how did he manage the card trick? The commissary produced a similar card from his pocket. Was that the sort of thing? He asked. Precisely, a facsimile. I thought so. Well, our colonel, I find, bought a packet of such cards intended for admission to a religious function at the Quai Mazarin. He cut out the centre, and you see here, the commissary turned it over, showed a piece of paper pasted neatly over the back, and this he tore off, and there, concealed behind it, lay a folded check, with only the place where the signature should be written shown through on the face where the seer had presented to us. I call that a neat trick, the commissary remarked, with professional enjoyment of a really good deception. But he burned the envelope before my eyes. Oh, but he burnt the envelope before my eyes, Sir Charles exclaimed. Pooh, the commissary answered. What would he be worth as a conjurer anyway if he could substitute the one envelope for another between the table and the fireplace without you noticing it, ah? And Colonel Clay, you must remember, is a prince among conjurers. What's a comfort to know we've identified our... What is a comfort to know we've identified our man and the woman who was with him? Sir Charles said, with a slight sigh of relief. Next thing will be, of course, you'll follow them up on these clues in England and arrest them. The commissary shrugged his shoulders. Arrest them, he exclaimed, much amused. Ah, monsieur, but you are the sanguine. No officer of justice has ever succeeded in arresting the Colonel Caoutchouc, as we call him in France. Caoutchouc means robber. And he is slippery as an eel, that man. He wiggles through our fingers. Sometimes, suppose we even caught him. Well, what could we prove, I ask you? Nobody who has ever seen him once could ever swear to him again in his next impersonation. He is impayable, this good colonel. On the day when I arrest him, I assure you, monsieur, I shall consider myself the smartest police officer in Europe. Well, I shall catch him yet, Sir Charles answered, and relapsed into silence. And that ends, like, the first chapter of, the whole novel of An African Millionaire. And all the stories are basically these guys going around, the African millionaire pursues Colonel Clay, and Colonel Clay always bests him, always. I hope that you guys had a good time tonight. I got confused in the accents, but it was a cold read, baby. I'm super exhausted. I'm gonna go up and maybe watch some dumb television. Hope you guys are doing all right, and I'm hoping you're healthy. Everybody's healthy. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. I got another vampire tale coming up, and I'm contemplating maybe what could be possibly the last episode of the series. I don't know, man. I hope you guys are healthy, happy, prosperous. I need to blow my nose because I've snorted a lot of dust today. Anyway, thank you for hanging with me, and I'm going to see you next week, and we'll chat, all right? DM me if you want, all right? So we can check in on one another, all right? Ready? Good night.